Yay.
So I'm Kathryn Alexander, and this is New Insights into Honesty. It was really wonderful for David to let me do this. There's nothing like focus, it just kind of opens up ideas and brings forth things that wouldn't show up otherwise. So I really appreciate this. And I have a particular way of looking at things. Um, So I see values as systems, which is really different from most folks. And in my world, there are three systems. One that is focused on being protective or safe. Another one which is more about being effective or kind of expressing yourself into a space. And then the third is life committed. And this came out of the work of Jane Jacobs. She saw the protective and effective value systems. And when I read her work, I knew there was a third. So I spent years doing research, talking to scientists and poets and indigenous folks, trying to distill the patterns that they saw in nature to just hear what they were seeing. And I saw that pretty much the same words kept coming up. And so that's what was I pulled together into the third system of values. The resilient value set is what I call it. Um, and it really allows us to move from being self-protected, self-expressed to engaged with life. And I think that's where we are actually as a species, that's kind of the path we're on. And at this particular point in time, we're really being called to engage with life in a very different way than we have before. We've not really paid attention to it. We've made assumptions and just assumed it would always be there. It was bigger than us. We didn't have to worry about it. Everything was fine. And I've discovered that that's not necessarily true. Um, my uncomfortableness with most of the values work that and ethics work that's happened is one, we don't seem to have an ethic. There's a whole bunch of them. Every industry has their own ethics, and they don't seem to feel like there's any real connection. Uh, and when I looked at that, the difference that I saw was that almost everything in our history that talks about ethics and values is human centric. It's all about us getting along with us, and there's nothing wrong with that, except it's not the whole system. And so the us getting along with life is just never been part of what we in the West have experienced in terms of our history around ethics and values. And just that made a big difference for me. Um, so the big difference with systems is that you're working from wholes and not parts and pieces. And that is really a critical understanding. We have Everybody has values, and that's part of the problem. When you start talking about values, it's like whose values? Yours values or my values? And my values are better than your values, and we get into that kind of thing. And we self-identify also with values. They become part of our identity, who we see ourselves as, which means every value has a lot of emotional baggage and connection and importance for us. Now, that's a problem because every value is a part. And if you don't see it as a system, then you get into the issues of taking values from one system and putting them into another system. And that corrupts both systems. They both become weaker because they're not whole and integrated. They don't fit, they don't work together. They have different intents and purposes. So it's different being safe than it is being effective. Okay, totally changes things. Not that safety is not in the idea of being effective, but it looks different than it does when you're afraid of the others and protecting yourself from them. And so that difference is dramatic. But because we don't see it, we get whiplashed by those differences in the real world when we apply our parts and pieces instead of wholes. Honesty, I'm positing, is a way of creating congruence with a point of view or a worldview. So back to those three systems again. If you're really wanting to be safe, then honesty has a place in that value system, but it's very different than if you're trying to be effective. Okay. I'm talking about these two because we're really familiar with both. We will knee jerk back into the protective value set in a heartbeat if we're afraid. And if you notice, there's a lot of fear around now. And so there's a lot of desire to have somebody in authority tell us what to do, because that's how that value set is designed, that you have somebody in charge and they know better than you do. And that's what keeps you safe. And we're growing out of that, but we still have those habits. And we still have that sensitivity to do that without really understanding what it is we're doing. And honesty also creates a congruence between both inner and outer spaces. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Um, if you're not honest with yourself, that is another layer of stuff that gets in there in terms of how the words I want to use are true to yourself, you want to be. It may look uncomfortable in a public space to really share some of that. And so that pulls that protective piece out into expression in a way that may not really be intended or useful. Um, so I'm trying to see honesty as congruent with right relationship. And what I've seen in the work I've done is that that third system of values, when you start thinking about life, it totally changes the conversation. You're talking about really different things. And so some of these words actually don't make a lot of sense. And honesty is one of them, because if you're, well, you'll see why I'm saying that in a minute. So honesty and truth, and then authenticity. These are the three things that I came up with when I really started thinking about honesty, that you can't have one without the other. They kind of rotate through. And it depends again on who you are in that space as to what actually shows up. So we've knocked around truth, philosophically for centuries, without ever coming up with any clarity around that subject matter. And I think this is probably why, because truth depends often on things. And the but depends always gets in the way of how you define truth, or who defines truth, or what they make of it. So looking at these three systems, I feel helps create a context for what truth means in this space. So I find it useful in that way. There's always the subjective and the objective truth. And again, this comes back to who you are and how clear you are about who you are as to what that truth will look like, or whether you are practicing self-deception in some sort of creative way, which we're really, really good at. And that just changes everything, it just really shifts what's going to happen and what we can do. The other concept that I find, I think we're really growing out of, is right and wrong. And we don't want to grow out. It's so nice to know that things are right, things are wrong. It's so clear, and it's nice to make other people wrong and make yourself feel right. So we get very vested in that game as well. But I think that time is passing. So honesty is a process, and truth is a destination. And it varies because of all the things we just talked about. So we're going to explore that a little more. And then authenticity becomes the test or the evaluator of where you are in all of that. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So, honesty and safety. In the real world, life is just really interesting and oftentimes scary. So there are real world complications. And one of the mythologies I think that we've grown up with is that we can create the world we want. And that's that's so true, and it's also not true at the same time. And where rubber meets the road is this reality thing, this thing that's outside of us. The life that happens outside of us has its own way of being. And we've never figured out how to integrate those two because we've held ourselves as separate. And so that separation has really prevented us from seeing a lot of things. And when you're protecting yourself from the other, however that is defined, there is a set of values that comes along with it. And I'm not going to go through that. We don't have time to do that. Um, but there is one of those values, which is called deceit for the sake of the task. And when I talk to people about that, they go, oh, we don't do that. We don't do that at all. I say, okay, so we're in a corporate setting and we've got quarterly reports, and how true are they? Oh, well, next month or the next quarter will be different. I can make it up in the next quarter, and I would be too difficult to explain why we didn't do what we did in this quarter. Anyway, you get the picture. We have ways of justifying deception in that value set because protection is the highest goal. It's the intent of that value set. And so we will justify it. It's just fine. And there are certain parts of society where we've actually given them carte blanche to do this. So the police department, the military, and religion are three places where you see that all the time. Undercover agents, spies, that's deceit for the sake of the task. It is fine to do this. So honesty takes a very different look here. It's not about showing what's real or showing what happens with the outside circumstances. It's all about this internal space that we're creating of safety and the justifications we're using to do that. So lying is okay here and even called for in some spaces. So it's really important to know. That's why people can be good people and do this and feel good about themselves because they're protecting whoever, whatever they're protecting. The story I love is the Exxon Valdez, when that ship sank and made a mess of the coast of Alaska. The Exxon folks came out and were horrified. They just could not believe what had happened. They were heartfelt, apologetic. We'll make you whole. We'll make it safe. We'll take care of it. No problem. We'll handle it. Well, then they got back into the corporate world and had to protect the company and spent 25 years not paying anything and then paying a pittance and justify that because they were working for the company which they were protecting, not the town which they didn't live in, and it wasn't their job to protect, even though their humanity would have said that that was true. So that's for me a really good example of what happens when we get caught and don't understand what we're doing. It's honesty and effectiveness. So that's all about the task. It's all about making the transactions between people work well. And honesty is the core value in that system, actually, because nothing works when you're trying to work with people who used to be enemies or could be enemies in the future, and you still want to have a transaction and continue having transactions with them. If they feel that you're not honest, they're not going to have anything to do with you, or they're going to retaliate. So you really have ways now of ensuring that honesty. Contracts come into it, ways of writing things down so you don't forget, all that kind of clarity. So honesty becomes different here because it's really necessary. And in business, we see this tension a lot. When you see things going south, you want to say to somebody, wait a minute, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. And if the protective value set is really high in that area, you're seen as a troublemaker, not a team player, all those things, or whistleblower, because you can't actually say what's happening, even though you see it and know it, and everybody sees it and knows it, but nobody's going to say it because it goes against that value set. So that tension is one that we often see in business. This is the value set for business. The protective value set does not work there. And we all know that. There's nobody that will argue with me about that. But giving it up is a whole other thing. And what do you give it up for? It's not clear. It's not clear. And it seems bad luck not to be loyal to your boss. That's not a good thing. But your loyalty should be to the business, not to the boss man. But that's another conversation. So there's such a conflict, and we run into it all the time. So I'm hoping that this sort of clarifies the two points, that they're systems, they're wholes, they have a point of view, they're a way of looking at the world. And if you take a value from one system, in this case, the effective value set of honesty, and put it into the protective value set, it makes a mess. It runs counter to everything that everybody's trying to do. They're trying to be safe, and you're saying this isn't going to work. Well, that's a problem. How do you deal with that? Especially if you're not the boss. It raises all sorts of conflicts. If you're in a system that says we really want to be effective, and I think some of us have had this experience at work where you're on a team and the whole point is to really do a really good job, and all of a sudden, nobody's wrong. You share those problems. You just share it because you want it to be effective. Honesty is just right there. It's just how you are, because everybody has to know everything in order for it to work. And that's the goal. So it's clear and it's okay and it's comfortable to do. But it's the value set that makes the difference. So I turned to nature for a couple of reasons. One, I was curious. And two, nature seems to work really well. Um, you know, you've got all these different entities trying to live their own lives, and yet somehow or other, it all works. We don't see them, they don't kill each other to death. In fact, rarely do they kill each other to death. I mean, that's really an unusual thing. Whenever they fight until it's really clear that who the winner is, and they quit. So what's the values that leads to that kind of behavior was my question. The other thing is nature doesn't lie. There is nothing in nature that lies. Why would you say something that would get you killed? Makes no sense. And so there's no lying in nature. Now there's camouflage, so they do deceive, but they deceive for self-protection. And when they are poisonous, they often have colors that flash that tell everybody, don't eat me. They're not trying to entice somebody to eat them and kill them. That's not the intent. The intent is to be personally safe and just you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone and we'll all be happy. So there's not this denying of reality because of the connected piece. They don't deny the connection. And I think that's really what happens especially with Western culture. We deny the connection. We actively work to deny the connection. And in that denial becomes this confusion about why would you do things? Because you have to do things only through a connected understanding. The value of the other is as important as the value of you. And if that's true, then how do you manage those shared values together? And that's a very different perspective and way of looking at things. But it's also, I think, the gift. So honesty and a thriving life. So in the earth values or in the resilient value set, I call this the prime directive. And it came from Jeannie Benyus of biomimicry fame. And she said simply that her understanding was that all actions create the conditions that support life. So all other living beings are creating actions that create the conditions that support life. And that is incredibly profound. And for humans, it's not just physical life, it's also the joy of life. Because if we don't enjoy life, we die. If we don't feel loved, we die. So those things are really important in human systems. And so in my world, only those actions that do that, that create the conditions that support life, are honest actions. Everything else is undercutting the purpose of that particular value set and therefore not honest. That makes sense. So that's all about right relationship. And that's where the indigenous people really have hung on to that understanding. So right relationship is one of the values from the resilient value set. And the Aboriginals in Australia in particular, they live in such a huge space in such small tribes, and yet they're able to communicate across vast distances through mental telepathy. They understand and know and feel and sense and respond to those situations just casually. That's just how it is. And so there's a couple of things about that. You can't be so intimately connected and lie. Okay, it's totally counterproductive. You just can't do that in that space. You're a threat to everybody if that. So there's an incredible honesty in that. And you see that in other indigenous cultures as well. There's sort of a marvel that we could not do that. Or when we don't do that, they don't quite understand why we do that. And that I I get it. Believe me, I don't understand why we do it either. Although I'm caught in the same value system as everybody else. So it's not easy for me either. Um, the point is to always enhance life. And so if that's the point, then why would you do anything that doesn't enhance life? And hiding the reality does not enhance life. Um, Manipulating the reality does not enhance life. Uh, Reframing the reality, and we're seeing that happen on a massive scale everywhere, does not enhance life. And you can see it. I mean, it's why are they doing things that impact them, are going to hurt them? And they don't see that at all because they don't see that connectedness. They're holding themselves as separate and different. And therefore, their mind doesn't make those connections. And that's why connection is just so important, in my view. So a little bit about history. This is really fun to discover, actually. So the Aristotelian worldview, which so infuses so much of Western thought, is really stemming from the whole idea of separation. And he did a lot to support that, actually. So in that value system, in that belief, that worldview, people are very separate from nature. Um, And more importantly, people are you, who you are, who you define yourself as, is not your body. Your body doesn't count. Your body gets in the way. You're not to pay attention to your emotions. It's all about the mental processes and thinking mentally and understanding deeply and those kinds of things. So that worldview really supports will and intent, which are very ego oriented, which is why I talked about authenticity. So Aristotle believed that you could come to an understanding of who you are by thinking and by really processing deeply what happened to yourself and that kind of thing, and hanging on to um, the values. And the word is just escaping me. Um, but there, all of those virtues that he really promulgated were the ways in which you could become a good person because you were thinking about your behavior and that virtue and trying to make your behavior fit that virtue. So effort and discipline were really important parts of being a good person. Now, if you look at the other side of the world, the Taoist view, um, individuals are connected to source. And again, that's where that connection piece comes in. So it's not just connected to each other, but we're connected to each other through source. Source permeates everything. And you can call it nature, you can call it spirit, you can call it God, whatever word you use to describe that. There is a fundamental energy that permeates all living things and connects them. And so, from the Taoist worldview, when you act spontaneously, that is the most pure, the most correct response you can have. And if you think about your own life, when you're in a situation, driving a car and you're in an accident, or you're seeing an accident happening in front of you, you're not sitting there thinking, should I go left or right? Do I stop or go forward? Your body takes over. Things happen outside of your mind to get you through that space. And you will get through that space if you just let it go and do it. If you get your mind in there, it becomes a mess. It slows everything down because the mind is just not as fast as what is happening. So there's something in our own experience that validates this perspective, but it's not something that we really pay enough attention to, in my view. We've started, I think, when we talk about heart and mind and that difference, that the heart energy is different. There's still this efforting, though, that goes into so much of Western thought about who we are and how we are, instead of the letting go and trusting what's actually there. And in the Taoist view, this no thought action, the surrender to source, is where authentic and honest and appropriate action happens. Um, and as I say, we have some experience of this in our own life often. We just don't pay enough attention. So from these two, it would appear that authentic action is connected in some way to source, that there is, if you really can get into the space where you trust life and trust that life wants life to happen, then the decisions life makes will be always to make that happen. That does not mean death doesn't occur, but the death then is integrated into supporting life. I go back to the dictum, thou shalt not kill. We flag that a lot, and we don't believe it for a second. We've got all these reasons why you can kill. You can kill to protect yourself. You can kill to protect your loved ones. There's lots of ways in which killing is sanctioned, but not understood and not integrated. They're exceptions to the rule instead of really showcasing what the rule might be. In nature, you kill to eat, period. That's pretty much it. And life eats life. That is how life continues. So death becomes integral when it's used in that way. We kill for fun, we kill for power, and those things don't work. They don't fit into the system. They don't enhance life in any real way. And so it's always a bit uncomfortable, even when we tolerate it. So we want to tell ourselves no, but we don't know why. So honesty and free will, this is another really interesting thing that came up. So in the Aristotelian worldview, free will is a big deal. Okay. And certainly in a lot of, especially Western Christian religion, free will is a big deal. And that sort of would suggest that we have the power, need the power to be good people. And I'm thinking from the Taoist position that it is really a misunderstanding of agency that has gotten reframed as free will, because it isn't really free. It has to be in relationship. It's agency and relationship. You always have the responsibility and the option to be in right relationship or not as humans. That is one of the choices we get to make. So maybe that's where free will sits. But it doesn't mean we can just do what we want or we can do what we think is right. It has to be appropriate to the situation. And when that happens, we feel there's a sense of completeness that happens in those situations when the decision you made is just really right, no matter what it is. You can feel when it's right. For me, that's a validation of this connected piece, that we are sensitive, it's available to us all the time. We just need to practice that space. So one of the questions you might want to think about is, what is the role of ego in honest action? Where does that fit for you personally? Self-deception. So there's a little book, by the way, called Self-Deception. It was done by a consulting company, and it's truly lovely. And it's very hard to find, but it's just beautiful. Because self-deception is a box, in their terms, that we put ourselves into. And we define the edges of that box, and then it gets really scary to step out of the box. So we do all sorts of things to keep ourselves in it. Um, and it's a way of hiding from our own self. I shouldn't, I can't, um, are two really good indicators that there's a box sitting there that you're really busy putting yourself into. And Rumi's poem, Out Beyond Ideas of Wrongdoing and Right Doing, There is a Field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And that's what I meant when I said it's a whole different world. It totally changes your perspective. If what's appropriate is appropriate, then that's what it is. It's not right or wrong. Those words don't really make any sense in that context. It is what needs to happen to fulfill the entire desires of all the participants at that time. And that is bigger than our mind can hold, but it is something that Source really is very in tune with. So that's, for me, why I understand that works. The effort that Aristotle suggests we have to make is really different than the effort the Taoists suggest we make. So the Taoists recommend that we effort in letting go of our box, our sense of self, actually, in a way. That's what the part of meditation is, experiencing being in connection with other things, other bigger things than yourself, and finding how right that is, how okay that is. So you begin to trust that space. And it is all about the right relationship. So you have no idea what the other in the relationships you're in needs. You really don't know that. But you do subtly, because again, Source is there and present in the entire situation. So being able to respond to that in a spontaneous way and to trust that allows that to show up. And so for me, that's where honesty really shines. So honesty with heart and mind, the spontaneous versus the thoughtful, the discernment about when to use what, the right relationship, being able to actually discern what the relationships are, and then the impact of those three worldviews on safety, effectiveness, and life thriving are really key ways to begin to ruminate for yourself in your own life on honesty and where that shows up for you and how it shows up for you and where it works and where it might not. So I'm open to questions or thoughts, comments.
Well, first off, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my mind's blow. I mean, every slide I have we can have a conversation about, you know. But I'm just gonna say the things that I really liked when you said honesty is a process and truth is the destination. That I'm still kind of, I like that. I'm still kind of thinking about it, so I can't say too much, but that was really an interesting thought process. So, yeah. And I also love the relationships that you brought up with nature. You know, it's really how the do not kill, those two things. I mean, it's just fascinating that we have this real, you know, religion is so prominent in so many cultures, and that's the key theme. And yet the doom to doom to doom.
Yeah.
And the statement that trust that life wants life to happen. Like, and giving in like the instinct being stronger than the, you know, the thought, the ego side of things. That was, I can see that.
Go ahead, Evan. Looked like you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say that um, the effort to really look at these as whole systems and seeing where the trajectory of evolution is, where we're kind of tapping out and mirroring kind of the worst possible reality right now to kind of say, okay, are we done with this duality thinking and this kind of right and wrong and these exclusive kind of safety and kind of manipulative ways of thinking about things versus allowing life to unfold with the level of life thriving kind of naturally and having more of a consciousness that is elevated with those values in that system. And so it's just really beautiful as you walked it through to go, oh yeah, that is where we're moving or where we are now. But not everyone has gotten that memo because we're the other value areas that haven't been met and or need attention or somehow um, are not healed and or expressed are kind of shadowing the emergence. Anyhow, I like how you put it all together, and it's very forward thinking and timely for where we are right now. So good job.
Thanks, Ethan.
Um, First, I really enjoy the view between Aristotle's view of the world and the Tao view of the world. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and revisit that a couple times, but it seems really helpful in some of the conversations I'm having with people where we get a little stuck. So I appreciate that. But I did have a question between what you're calling the two systems. Feels like one is safety slash protective, and the other one is effective. Are those the terms you would use for the two systems?
Yes, they're not Jane Jacobs terms, because um, we were talking before she died, and she was going to get me permission to use her work without having problems with the publisher, and that never happened. So I've been really cautious about. I always give her credit, but I don't want people to feel I'm plagiarizing in that kind of way. So I've sort of changed some of
I
the
don't know what
language.
her terms were.
Um, uh,
I mean, I
Guardian,
know who she is, but
yeah, yeah, it was in her book is called Systems of Survival. It's a very small book and it's also hard to get. And it's written as a dialogue. I've tried to use it as a text and it just confuses people because she's just dialoguing. Oh, well, it could be this and it could be that. And people want to be clear. It's this or that. And she didn't take that perspective. So it's really more confusing for some people than it would be. But yeah.
Catherine, you said that she didn't use that language. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, she just her like I can't remember the second one. The Guardian, it was the protective value set. Uh, but when I talked to about the values, I found it impossible to reframe those in any real way. So when we
So
walk, like dissent for the sake of the task is her term.
descent for
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the protective value set, it's oh geez. Um, I'm not remembering it, so I'm not going to be able to say that, but it's a different kind of dissent. Um, and it's deceit for the sake of the task instead of dissent for the sake of the task. That's the difference. So in the protective value set, it's deceit for the sake of the task. And that's a value. I mean, it's not a language we normally hear around values. This is very much her language. Um, and it very much fits the whole purpose of that system of values and protectiveness. So deceit is part of that. But it's also kind of a shocker to people to say, well, you do this, and then to really begin to unpack where you do that and where we justify it because we do. I mean, it just it's in your experience, which is what has given me such confidence in her work. I mean, it took her 12 years to determine this, and it's richer. There's more to it. And we didn't have a chance to talk about adding nature, which I think she would have really resonated with because her last book was very much about nature and economics. But I don't think she had thought about nature and values either. So I really am sorry that we didn't have those conversations. But
I've got another question, but I just want to make sure if there's someone else who wants to go that. So I'm curious, given your diverse background in soil work and other things, this feels like something that came after lots of thought and study, and curious what your motivation to develop and perfect or move this forward, like what drove you to focus on this?
uh, at the time, this was all I was doing.
Okay.
But I have not had a really enthusiastic welcome. When in my corporate life, when I was talking about values and ethics, people were always worried that they would not be able to make money if they got into that situation, and therefore they were not too excited about exploring values and ethics. So it was not something that really seemed to grab people or other people really clomb down to. So I was delighted to discover you guys because you're talking about values, but it's such a different perspective. So I've been sort of cautious about uh, feeling like I was being intruding, which I don't intend to be. But I've just found it so useful. It just clarifies so many things for me. It has. It just makes things so much more clear. But yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to say, Kathryn, thank you very much. I thought it was really interesting. I think uh, the tricky thing about values is always that it's never totally clear cut. You've got this whole range of values that we all have to some extent, or most of them we have to some extent, but actually the values all have their they clash quite often. The one value pulls against another value. And that's really what you're talking about there, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got honesty and truth, particularly particularly honesty, where my value may be honesty, but as you say, safety, for instance, might be another very strong and very understandable value to
Yep.
have. But there are more, and some of which you touched on. But it's true with most values that there's always the potential for, it depends, as always, it depends on the context. It depends where we're talking. And actually it depends when you start getting into Aristotle and the Tao, it depends on what level you're talking, really, doesn't it? But whether you're actually talking about a purely worldly situation or whether you're actually talking about some deeper level of truth in what we see. A lot of people, Taoists too, Buddhists, others, would see the world as being of dubious reality. So we can look at the world as being, we might all say, well, some things are true. We're stuck to this world by some sort of weird force of magnetism. Here we are, there are those things over there, the things over there. Isn't that the truth? And actually, sure, it's the truth, but at another level, it may be all an illusion if you have a different point of view. If you come from a different cultural tradition, but even if you think deeply. So I always was horrified by the idea that truth is relative, but it clearly is in many ways, or at least it's conditional. It's depending on the context. It's contextual. And I think that's the difficulty of having a lot of conversations. A conversation in a lot of areas of value. But when values where you really it's quite complex, and that's why values are such a tricky thing to talk about to people, because it's so easy to come up with yes, but what would you do there? And you tie yourself up in knots if you're not careful on this whole issue. I prefer to see values as something quite practical and pragmatic. How do we live a better life? How do we care for the world around us? How do we care for each other? And really, I think cerebration is not necessary to be celebrated. I think, values come from the areas of our consciousness which are usually we're not aware of. They come from the subconscious. They come from sort of emotions. They're charged with emotion, and that's the power of them. And that's, I think, debating them, I think, is absolutely fair and absolutely good and fascinating. But we can, maybe that's not the way we should use values or view values. I don't know.
Also, isn't it a rule that after Charles speaks, we have to wish him a happy World Values Day every time, like celebrate, woo, happy World Values Day.
World Day.
Yes. Happy World Values Day, everyone.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And Charles, I think that's where the three systems really help me allow for the diversity and also to see the congruence and where these pieces, because each system is a piece, fits into the whole. And I think we're moving away from so many pieces into a more coherent and congruent way of looking at life, which allows for those, but doesn't sit there. They aren't central.
Something that's really I was on mute. I wanted to give Charles a thumbs up and a high five. But what it is when you can see that more integrated approach, or as things are starting to shift. For example, Charles, I went through all the different presenters and all the different events that are put together, and to see how it's evolved and how the caliber and the types of conversations that people are having and the way that it was produced and all the planning, it just galvanizes like, hey, this is a path, this is a movement that's getting stronger. And when you see and reflect on that integration, it helps you as an individual or organization to kind of level up to that same frequency, if you will. So I think it's besides just a congratulations on World Values Day. There's something about the continual improvement process that helps for these values to move in that life thriving space, because I'm very proud to be a part of it. I've been a part of it for quite a while, but to see how it's put together and the people that are there, it just gives me more motivation to stay a course towards these types of values that you've identified. And I really think you've done an exceptional job this year, and it feels good to witness and to see how things evolve. Because if you don't continue to evolve or thrive, you don't model that to others. And then hope is so needed. And so not only hope, but the confidence in embodying it in action. So great job, Charles.
Thanks, Alan.
I don't know if we have time. I was thinking that we could do a breakout.
Sure, 5 minutes.
Okay, so if we did it in pairs so that people have a fair amount of time to talk.
Yeah, my only thing is I do have a 10 o'clock, so just as long as we can wrap up by 10, but it's all ready to go. Just
okay. So let's see,
is there something you want them to discuss?
So if you can see the screen, it says pick a time in your life when one of these worldviews was most prominent: safety, effectiveness, or thriving life. And think of a situation where you did your best, but the outcome was not as you expected. And then reflect on that given what we've talked about today. Do you have new insights or understandings that come to mind?
All right.
Okay.
Man. Oh,
Yay.
all right. Well,
So I have one last slide, if you don't mind.
go for it.
This came up with Joanna because if you want to go a little deeper in this, I'm doing a class in December.
Ah,
So it's 4 weeks, and we'll go deeper into each of these value sets and what the values are and what that means, kind of. So you can sign up on our website under events if you want to do that.
awesome. Well,
Thank you.
Kathryn, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Definitely changes some traditional thinking that I have about values. So I'm going to rewatch it myself, and we'll share it out so more people can see it. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kathryn.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.